Well, welcome everyone. This is the 2024 State of Our Hoods report, and we are really happy to be sharing with you some of the insights from our annual survey and letting you be part of the insights that we've gathered from the communities across Australia that we've been fortunate enough to work with. I'm going to try and get rid of the timer, which has somehow decided to be part of our reality now. Here we are, happy days. My name is Jo Taranto, and it is my absolute pleasure to be with you today. I'm the co-founder of Good for the Hood. I've been the managing director for 6 years now, and we have worked with I really should recount, but it's been at least 200 councils. It might even be closer to 300 now around Australia. Through the projects that we've worked on, we've been incredibly fortunate to have worked with most New South Wales councils, a huge chunk of Victorian councils, a sprinkle of South Australian councils, and a little bit in WA and Queensland. If you are part of the Northern Territory, we would love to hear from you. But that's not the purpose of today. But we've been incredibly fortunate to work with regional, rural, metropolitan, expanding, shrinking, tiny, huge, and really diverse communities all around Australia. And we do it for one reason, is because we're passionate about the solutions that communities need. We're passionate about the solutions that communities don't understand yet. And we're passionate about having connected, socially cohesive, positive places to live that also live within our planetary boundaries. So sustainability is our absolute aim, but we know that change and change management doesn't always happen smoothly, and it requires strong economies and economic growth in communities. It requires people who get along and who can work together and are there for each other during times of natural disaster or conflict or uncertainty. And also we know that it requires an awful lot of great storytelling and getting people to be involved and sharing the positive things that we believe sustainable solutions can absolutely bring. So that's why we do the work we do, and we've been really lucky to be part of a lot of programs that have been very successful in sharing positive solutions for communities too. So thank you if you've been part of those in the past. Since 2018, we've been working with communities from all different aspects, sometimes through grant programs, sometimes because you have a new initiative like FOGO coming, sometimes because there's been something unfortunate that's happened in the community and it's time to respond or adjust to that. So it's been a wild ride. Never expected that my previous corporate career would have got me here, but here we are, and I'm incredibly proud of the work we do and the partners that enable us to do that. But we quickly realized last year, and I mentioned that Anna is on the call with us today, that we're in a unique position, that we're working with the more activated people in communities around Australia. So we have a unique opportunity to hear from them. And we know that they're the sort of people that councils are often very aware of. And they're the sort of people that councils are often hear from. But we also recognise that there's a lot of unsung, quiet community champions. And there's also a lot of people in the community that have not yet identified themselves as those potential champions or enablers of positive community change. And so we want to know what would make life better or easier for them, what would activate them, what would enable them to be better storytellers or communicators and help them to be part of that process. And we're going to share a little bit of information as to why we think that's so important, and a little bit of the state of the conversation and the narrative in Australia at the moment, in every community of differing levels, based on some of the most recent research that's come from two very important studies that happen annually as well. So it won't just be our information. We know that we're but a small slice of the pie. But we will be sharing that in the context of these broader conversations as well. So I have seen that we've got people from the City of Sydney and Hunters Hill here. I know that we have A couple of other councils. I know we've got Port Stephens in the room. I think we've got, I did know where you're from, but I'm not going to say it in case I'm wrong. But please let us know. We've got the wonderful Gay from Windsor Shire, who I'll be visiting tomorrow, and I owe you an email, Gay, and I will get back to that. But thank you for joining us. Please let us know. Oh, Inner West, thank you, Rachel. Great to see some Sydney councils, and I believe we have got a few interstaters as well. I am coming to you from the land of the Wallumattagal in Sydney, on the land of the Snapperfish people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to the lands of which you're coming from today, all diverse, all unique, and all representative of different bioregions. And also extend my respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. 2024, maybe not the kind of year that we hoped we'd have, or maybe it's exactly the kind of year that we expected we would be having as communities. It's really interesting looking back from where we were last year and when we did the survey. Very different pressures, very different conversations, and if anything, the challenges that were there last year have kind of been amplified again. So I wanted to just touch on the fact that when we're having any of the conversations that we do around sustainability, we all know that it's a very noisy space and we're competing with multiple issues. And sometimes we feel like we're losing that conversation because something else is way more important. So I wanted to highlight the fact that these are the things that not just myself and our communities are saying, but I'm hearing from our councils, I'm hearing from think tanks, from surveys, and it's certainly touched on by these two documents that I've shared here, and Anna will share these links. If you don't subscribe to these two reports, they are really powerful insights about what's happening at a macro level in Australia and globally. The Elderman Trust Barometer is really useful to understand as an institution and also how we relate in Australian institutions compared to the rest of the world. And it talks about some of those trust issues that we certainly know has consistently started to come out of communities. And also the Ipsos Climate Change Report, which I was lucky enough to go to last week, a briefing around, really unlocked what Australian communities are feeling and thinking around, particularly sustainability, which I use as a broader word to mean any solution which helps us achieve net zero or reduce our waste and align more with a circular economy. These are the things that are consistently coming up in those reports and from you. So we know that we have a housing crisis. We know we have a cost of living crisis. And so almost every topic that is touching on anything to do with communities comes back to those two fundamental things. Do I have somewhere safe and affordable to live? Do I have choice and in what I do with my accommodation and where I live? And can I actually change anything in that environment if I'm renting, for example? Can I even afford to be in those places and live in those places where I work? And can I afford to, get away with more than just the basic considerations? And am I even thinking about things that I perhaps was a couple of years ago? The other thing we've seen significantly is this conversation around trust. And it's a big one. I often talk to big corporates and industry groups about trust, and they said that there's not a lot of good faith at the moment in the private sector from the general community. And this is coming across as well to government programs and institutions as well. Trust is not something that's being achieved by big business and by government at the moment. And that's not to say that it's the fault of those institutions necessarily, but there's a lot of trust to be won back. And I'll talk to some of the research that's showing that at the moment. And that makes it really, really hard when you are from an organisation that is trying to do wonderful things and trying to get services, programs, projects, levies, subsidies, support to do good things. And that's what, all the departments that we work with, waste, sustainability, environment, open space, you're all trying to do that. And you're all often trying to help people save some money. So if fundamentally there isn't that community trust, that can be really hard to get people to participate, engage, or think favourably about those opportunities. We often hear in the sustainability space. So why don't you just focus on, potholes and picking up the bins, and don't do all that extra stuff. And I think that sense that there are, local councils and state governments have maybe lost a little bit of the trust of the community simply because some of the bigger trust issues that are going on as well. In the context of that, we've seen an interesting tick in the amount of technical capabilities in the professions in Australian communities in the last 12 months. There's some really interesting ABS statistics, is that the growth in the technical capabilities in Australia has gone up significantly, which means that we've got a very sophisticated residents and consumers. We've got quite intelligent and capable workforce in our communities as well. And in the scheme of that, we also have this strange and insane kind of adoption of AI. We know that about 2/3 of Australian communities are using generative AI in everything from work to community engagement through to handing in assignments at school. So that's happened very quickly in the last 12 months. The other things that have popped up is an increase in inequity, in community wealth. It's social cohesion concerns, particularly after October last year. We know that the conversation around the Middle East has definitely raised levels of, anti-Semitic and Islamophobic kind of sentiments within the community in different places. So that might be something that's really you're starting to notice. And it's also feeding into, some of those other challenges with trust and people looking at each other, wondering about where they sit and how they interact. The final piece of the puzzle, and it sounds a bit bleak, is that we have seen an ongoing flexible workforce. So we have seen people stay out of places they perhaps would have stayed if you work in the city. We know that is changing. And we also have seen that businesses are starting to use flexible working arrangements actually as part of their net zero strategies. So they're actually saying, well, that's part of the commute. Maybe it's good that we, sorry, I've got the Elderman Trust link. Okay, great. And then the final piece of it is that, and you'll see this from the Ipsos climate change report, is that and the thing that probably worries me the most is that Australians' climate literacy is pretty poor. Our understanding of solutions, how they work, despite the fact that we are technically capable and quite intelligent, I think our overarching understanding of some of the solutions that we're looking at and trying to aspire and get people to engage with, and why we're actually doing that ultimately, is still quite low. And so when we explain, what we're trying to do as a council or as a community, what often happens is people say, well, why you don't this, and oh no, but I don't want that because this will happen. And what it does is opens up this chasm of, it shows people sort of a lack of understanding. And it's never been more obvious than when I've spoken to people about rooftop solar, and they've said, yeah, it's great, but I can't go off grid. And they live in the middle of a metropolitan, city. And I'm thinking, what do you mean go off grid? They're like, well, I don't want to get solar because I don't want the lights to go out when it gets dark. And I said, but you'll still be connected to the grid. And there's this really interesting understanding of the fact that people still don't quite get the basics. And that's just the solution. If you unpack why we are wanting people to electrify, there's still a disarming lack of understanding about what renewables can hold and what those solutions can hold. And that's been kind of, it is a huge problem if we're trying to do the work that we all need to do. So that's the context of all these things. There's a lot of positive things going on, don't get me wrong, but it is messy. And I think it's never been messier. And we know that we can't transition our economy and our communities safely without social cohesion, strong economy, and the solutions that'll get us there. And so if we have fractures coming into different parts, it can be harder and harder to try and do the work we need to do. So I'm going to, with that lens, lean into the Ipsos report. Hopefully, we just had, I think it was Rachel saying that she got there just by copying and pasting the link. So this is from the Ipsos climate report. I would recommend downloading these slides, sharing them with your team, sending them to your boss, giving them to your community champions, because the insights in here, whilst they are incredibly macro and they are incredibly high level, they are really great talking points for what it means for your community and your strategies, and also the projects and programs you're talking about. I think it will highlight some of the gaps and opportunities for you as an organisation or as a community. So these are the key takeaways from the Ipsos Climate Change Report. And this is just for this year, and they do this every year. So there are a lot of trends that they look at over time, and you can compare where we've come from. But this is the sort of overarching trends that they've seen, that there remains a strong support in Australia for in the community for energy transition. There is a low understanding of the progress being made, and there is skepticism about Australia's ability to meet net zero targets. That doesn't just mean they're federal targets, but net zero within an organisation or in a community. There is an concern about the negative impacts of cost of living and also reliability of energy networks, or electricity, for example. And there is support for Australia taking a leading role in the energy transition, but that has softened or decreased on last year. So it's not a surprise because, I think there was probably a lot of push for more action, and that has perhaps weakened with those other factors going on. If anything is resonating for you, I'd love to hear in the chat as we go along. I don't want this to be too much of a lecture, but I guess I want to talk about why we do the work we do and why it's continued to be important. So this question that Ipsos asked was about the transition being seen as positive for the environment, but what the economic impacts are of a net zero energy transition, particularly renewables from solar and wind. And you'll see that, most people recognise that there are a lot of positives for climate change and air quality and even for economic growth and potentially jobs, but where they're worried is what it will mean for their bills and where it will affect their energy supply and the cost of living. So a lot of people are starting to say, hey, this seems like a good idea, but at what cost? And that makes it really hard for people to understand, the affordability of renewables long term, what it can mean for them. And unless you've had firsthand experience and you've seen what it can do, you often do think, well, why is everything so expensive, and why are we paying so much? And, and that can really, when you're struggling with all those other things, make it very hard to be positive about transitioning or electrifying more when we know that, it at the moment doesn't seem that much cheaper. We also saw this question around conflicting opinions on climate change. And this is where you'll see about 2/3 of Australians just under that are confident that they understand the causes and impacts of climate change. Just under 2/3. So that doesn't mean that they feel that they are confident. Doesn't mean necessarily they have a great understanding, but the information remains quite difficult for people to navigate. And I would agree, it's incredibly messy and complex. And what that does is when there's a lot of conjecture or a narrative of different opinions, what people tend to do is start to think, well, there's too much conflict for this to be real or for this to be right. And the more conflicting opinions, the more conjecture that maybe there is something that can be debated here or that can be discussion. And that's particularly around solutions as well. So you'll see year on year, it's stayed fairly plateaued, but certainly what we've seen in the last 12 months is this conversation around conflicting opinions. And I think we can probably see where that's happening, particularly at a federal level, but that does start to impact on people's confidence in solutions. So you might see uptake in a solution or a program plateau off as well, or it's harder for you to have those conversations in your community. I thought, interestingly, the understanding of technology and what's required in net zero, and this is the sort of solutions they've put very much around energy transition, but you could argue that this is similar for a lot of other solutions in our communities, from water reuse to recycling, FOGO. I don't think our baseline understanding in communities is particularly good. So when we're trying to have conversations about why we need to do something and what prices are associated or risks are associated, what can happen is, people can feel uncertain or start to think, oh, hang on, I don't know if this is the case. And you'll see that there are certainly some regional community challenges there around transmission lines and things, which we know are of great concern for regional communities and less or little to no concern for metropolitan communities. Interestingly, solar is better understood than most other solutions there as well. I thought this might be of interest, but we certainly know that our communities think that governments, and that includes councils, but certainly federal, state and local government, have the most ability to influence climate change, including big business, with multinationals being up there as well. So that's great, because obviously have a great ability to influence the macro stuff and make pretty sweeping policy changes. But also we know that they don't rate the performance particularly well all the time either. So certainly we know community groups, whilst they have less influence, are considered better performance when it comes to the solutions. So it is an interesting space to be in terms of understanding where people think people are doing a good job versus could be doing a better job. And we know that people's perceptions of what they're doing over time are generally increasing. So, most people do think that councils particularly, it's a bit hard to see which item that is, over time their performance is, in responding to climate change, is improving. So you might not feel that way in your area, but it's certainly what the survey is saying there. But also people are feeling that it's harder and harder to influence climate change, so that we all feel a little more helpless in that when we look at that, what our ability as a country or a nation is to influence change, is our perception of that has decreased a little bit. I thought this was probably the most interesting insight from that survey, and that was that the trust in the last 12 months of scientists has gone up 5%. We know that trust of scientists was pretty low, or lower, and that it's good to see that scientists are back at the top of the pile, and in my opinion, they should be. That's who we should be looking to for the experts' opinion. I thought it was interesting to know that friends and family did drop down a little bit, but are still highly influential when it comes to solutions. And unfortunately, government agencies lost a little bit of trust when it came to solutions, but not a lot. Local environmental groups, environmental not-for-profits, and friends and family are all considered pretty good places for trustworthy information on solutions, which, they may or may not be. And obviously business leaders and politicians are absolutely considered the least best place to get that information. So we also saw a lot of distrust on online forums and communities. So we know that places like Facebook and all our social media platforms that are public are really, really hard places to get credible, fact-checked, and in fact, pleasant information on a lot of these topics. And I'm sure all of you experience some of that toxicity. And finally, the last slide talks about the fact that, the impact of the transition on the cost of energy, and that equation between what it's going to be for us in terms of how is it eventually going to look? Are we just increasingly going to pay for more for energy for the rest of our lives? Will it plateau? If we invest now, is it cheaper in the long term? But that conversation, because we're also worried about the cost of living, is a really good one for us to be talking about, because everyone wants to know about the cost. And it is useful to know that, people are interested in the impact of transition and what it means for us as communities, not just the risks of, climate change or the status quo. So it is a good place to be having those conversations and pulling those together. Probably the final bit that really felt really useful for you all was this conversation about the fact that talking about solutions is where we need to be. And it's never been more obvious that solutions-based reporting and solutions-based journalism, and in fact sharing local solutions, has to be part of the conversation, because that is how we can make it real for our community, and also how we can help our audiences understand really complex things. There was a lot of discussion about the fact that you all have audiences that are whatever level of trust, and that your capacity to empower people through the solutions is kind of what's needed to demystify some of the complexity. So definitely go and check out the Ipsos report. It's full of really useful information. And as I said, you can download it as a PDF and just share it like I have. It is really helpful. I'd love to know any thoughts about what was interesting for you from that. I know it might take a little bit more to unpack it, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we go to the next part. But on the back of that, I wanted to talk about now what we saw at a very micro and hyper-local level from our survey, of which we got a couple of hundred people who are very activated. If we were to look at that spectrum of, to stepping into these topics for the first time through to maybe being engaged in these solutions for quite a while, I'll share with you in a second. We're definitely skewed towards the most activated, most active, and probably self-identifying community champions from around Australia. Of those, 77% were women. Interestingly, on the Ipsos data, they talked about who is supportive of climate change action and not. There was no gender bias. It wasn't that men were less supportive and that women were more supportive, or that there was an age group skewed. To be honest, it was fairly consistent. The one thing that was really interesting in the Ipsos data, which I didn't show you and you'll see on the slides, is that the number of climate change deniers who were men was higher. So that was the only sort of skewed area. For the most part, there was consensus from men and women that action was required. So we just tend to attract more women in our programs and projects. To be honest, I think most people we work with in councils in your roles are women. It just tends to be often the way that has worked. We do tend to work with people between that Gen X sort of generation, but we're increasingly finding younger people getting involved in programs. So it's not exclusive, and we obviously do work on a lot of youth programs as well. Thanks, Carolyn, no worries. So we know that we asked the same questions last year, but we saw higher numbers of people wanting to connect more with people in their community, higher numbers of people wanting to get to know their neighbours better, even though they self-identify as people who are pretty active in their community. Most people are pretty engaged, have some acknowledgement of what's happening locally, and also have volunteered in their communities before. And overarchingly, we had higher numbers of respondents this year and higher numbers of people who are alarmed about climate change. So it was interesting to know that the climate literacy in our group was actually higher as well. And that might just be because, we've had a different cohort respond, or it might just be that we've had certainly an increase of people's understanding as they're involved in more programs. So a lot of information on this slide. Let me unpack it. We asked people what would be great to see more of in their communities through their councils in particular. And this year, it really came down to the fact that they wanted to know case studies, models, examples, local information, key education that applies for very specific circumstances. And it seemed a lot more focused on the doing part and demystifying the doing this year than it was previous years. Often it was a lot more about capacity in the past. Now it seems to be more about, yep, okay, I know I want to do something. give me the how, give me those examples so that I can go and do it. I thought some of these insights were quite useful. We had more resources and models from other communities that we can deploy in our own. A lot of information about people wanting ways to connect, street parties, places where they can have authentic connection through events. A lot more information about electrification. I think people's sophistication and understanding of heat pump, hot water, battery storage, bidirectional charging from EVs, the technology is shifting, and I think people are a lot more wanting to go, okay, what does that mean for me? How do you make choices on cost versus payoff and payback periods? We also saw a lot of interesting information about, wouldn't it be great if we could be given concessions, subsidies, or support for the small stuff? Like, it's great to do big stuff, but I think a lot of people are recognizing that their ability to do big stuff is less and less. So wouldn't it be great if, for every fruit tree we could plant in our community, we were given, X, and I don't know that it was always financial, but there was a sense that if we did good, could this be incentivized as opposed to just penalizing the things that we don't want to see in our communities? Can we actually incentivize a lot more of the things that council want to see? That included, planting trees, gardening, waste avoidance and cleanups. There's a lot of talk in the community, and I'm not seeing it happen significantly differently, but I've attended quite a few sessions with communities around the role of participatory democracy and even and budgeting as well. I know it does happen coming up to the 10-year community strategic plans and all of that planning process, but it would be great to see community champions activated in that process and feeling part of that. And also, there's been even some discussion about the fact that, if you want us to come and be part of advisory committees and committees, could that be incentivized in some way? Again, not necessarily financial, but what are the ways that we can be supported to do that, so that it's not just, they're not just doing it because it's important, but also we're encouraging people who've not been involved before to get involved. So some interesting insights, I thought, and they'll all be in the report, which we'll send to you. I just wanted to share, as I said, this year we had a lot more people who were self-identified leaders and teachers. We've been doing a lot of programs where we've actually been getting people to run programs and using them as educators as well. Whether that's a reflection of that in our audiences or whether people just, have a different cohort this year. What we see when we ask people, what could you teach in your community or what could you be part of the conversation, is people love to use their lived experience. So we had this great example from a retired farmer in Western New South Wales who's saying that, would like to talk about soil and water use because that's what he's been doing for the last 50 years. So it is a great opportunity to look at people in a way that we don't just think about them as retired people or people who've had a previous career, that we actually bring that in as part of their experience to educate and share stories. So we're going to be doing a lot more work in that space, and we love those opportunities to work with champions like this person and others. All right. Now, she's on the call and I don't want to embarrass her too much, but I do want to thank Eva for being part of the discussion today and for being so generous in being our case study this year. I've had the absolute pleasure of getting to know Eva over the last 12 months. I may have even met you a long time ago, Eva. I'm not sure if we came to one of our sessions up in Raymond Terrace one time, but Eva lives in Port Stephens, beautiful part of the world. If you've never been, please get up there. It is a gorgeous part of the country. And Eva's been involved with her work and as a self-identified community champion. And I asked Eva some questions via email and just said, look, would you mind sharing with us your story and telling us a bit more about the work that you do? Because it really is such a positive story, and she had some great insights. So I believe Eva's been involved for about 7 years. She is part of a network which brings together a whole bunch of environmental groups in the area, and she might even share the link in the chat shortly. But Eva quickly identified and got involved in the network that she's part of, and that felt that, you know, it really would be useful to share more information with those groups, across groups, and not only just amplify the work that they were doing, but also recognize that, you know, by building on their mutual or sometimes differing interest areas, that there was benefit in that. And so Eva's been part of that communications piece for some time. She shares newsletters, runs a lot of pop-up events as part of festivals. She's been part of an organising committee for events, and she has said consistently that the challenge is getting the word out to as many people as possible, and reaching people. She also said that it's really easy to feel disconnected, but she sees it as her responsibility to take these challenges on board and be movers and shakers. And I think you'll see that from some of the stories that and things she shared. So this is one of the beautiful community emails and newsletters that Eva's part of creating, part of the Eco Update. And, you know, you can see that there's a lot of love, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of positive community-focused events. This is also part of the Sustainable Futures Festival that Eva and her community have been part of. Eva and her husband Tim are very active, but I think it's a network of a lot of different organisations. You can see there's some work there. I'm not sure. I think it must have been a park under threat, Eva, and I'm sure you can tell us more there. But this festival was run at a school. It brought together a whole bunch of different groups, local organisations, council, and really was about the doing aspect of those problems. What can we do, and how can we be part of those conversations and solutions? I also loved Eva's insights around community champions, that they don't have to be experts. And I think that that's exactly right. I think sometimes when they are experts, it's daunting, and it's not always representative of what people want to see. As we saw, friends, family, and community are really good messengers for climate solutions. So, but they do need to be patient and persistent. And I think that that comes through with the tenacity of this group and Eva's work as well. I really liked Eva's thoughts around approaching different people of different backgrounds and giving people an approach that will build their capacity. I know that I think I can say this, Eva, that Port Stephens is generally an older community up there, do tend to have a lot of retirees because it is such a magic place to live. But I know that it's also a challenge to engage younger people and even tourists as well, who are not always the best practicing environmentalists when they come to visit, I'm sure. So they have been part of the Renew network and working with them, and then participating in things like Sustainable House Day as well. So building on great campaigns and programs that exist instead of reinventing the wheel. Yeah, Eva's definitely an example of someone who does things because she's passionate about it, but also because she sees that she has a really powerful role to amplify what's been going on. Eva also talked about the fact that she was really excited about the opportunity to be on one of the environmental advisory committees with council, and the fact that that's now given her an opportunity and connections with council and Port Stephens which has opened her eyes up. And she did actually say that when I asked her what can councils do to support people like you, and here's Eva and Tim, she said that to listen, to create opportunities, to be part of and work collaboratively, Eva's mentioned there, the advisory committee, and having input into what council could address. She's found really powerful. A lot of our community champions are involved quite extensively with council programs. Having specific council contacts is again very important, and then recognizing that every voice matters. And I do like this point that your community champions may well be the introverted types, and therefore it's not necessarily about waiting for those people to be super vocal at meetings. It might need to engage them outside those interactions, and might need to be having those conversations in different ways for different people. So I want to thank Eva, because I really think it is useful for us to make this real. And we've had the absolute pleasure of working with Eva. Eva's been sharing some of the works that we've been doing with Port Stephens Council. And yeah, I know that you put tireless and countless hours into the work that you do, and I'm sure that it is very well felt in the community, and such a positive example too of what a community champion can do. All right, now I'm going to take some questions. I am going to just highlight the fact that we are actually going to be coming to Port Stephens and holding another event up in which is part of our Revitalised series. So I will share a bit more information shortly, but I just thought it was a good time while we're talking about Port Stephens that we will be heading up there with our wonderful friends from the Town Team movement, heading to a community of Karua, and absolutely celebrating the work that those communities are doing up there, and talking about the role of community champions both in placemaking and also in environmental works. You'll hear more about that, I'm sure, but it's a good little plug while we're talking about Port Stephens. So now is a great chance. I have actually got some pre-prepared questions that we took from our audience, so I'm going to start with those. And if you feel like you've got some answers to those questions, then please also jump in. It's always great to have a contribution from others. And then I will be sharing with you the report with a bit more detail, as well as a couple of other things as well. So the questions we had, I just had it open. Might just quickly go back to any other questions we have while I'm waiting to open up my screen. I'll quickly flick to this as well while we're talking. So the other thing we are doing at the moment with if you are looking for something else to be part of, or something for your community to talk about, we are hosting some sessions with the Sydney Water. So Sydney Water covers 37 LGAs across Greater Sydney, and there's a much needed conversation around purified recycled water and the role it plays as a decarbonising solution, but also as a resilience strategy for our water supply. So we currently rely 85% of our water on rainfall, and we know that in a changed climate, that will not be the solution that we can rely on. So, so if you're interested in getting a ticket for that, we've got some webinars coming, and yeah, love to have you at that session as well. I'm doing a great job of multitasking. Here we are. I've got it. All right. So the questions we had, firstly is, how can we best explore public-private partnerships with regard to maximising benefits with volunteering and business entrepreneurial activities? Ooh, I'm going to have a drink of water. I will think about that. So you may well have some questions that you want to, some feedback for that as well. I probably am best placed to talk about the fact that I see this. I see the public, private, between councils and private entities work, but probably not as the norm. I think the ways you can see it pop up is obviously for volunteering type activities, with bush care, with cleanups, those sorts of things, where there's a donation of time. I've seen that fail really badly, but I definitely know that is an area of interest that can be working on. I know that when there's a private engagement, then sometimes there is a requirement for, maybe that's a procurement challenge as well. So I think it's really important that if you are going to do something that involves a public-private partnership than there is transparency, both in the procurement process, the EOI, the response to the quote, all of that process, which is very well handled by councils, and sometimes that's very frustrating for entities that aren't used to working with local government. But as long as that's up front, and then I think obviously about looking at what the shared value and what people are trying to get out of it. I know that a lot of private companies don't understand why preferential treatment or promotion can't be given to a single organization, and that can seem but I think that's actually really critically important for government to have. So I would say that in the case of volunteering and things, it can be really useful, but I don't know if it's the role for community champions. And in fact, I think the way that people like to work with council is that as an independent, representative of the community. I think that's where there's best value. I hope I've helped there. I'm not sure if I have, but anyway, we'll be happy to have questions there about that one. We promoted our Champions program to an exhaustive list of platforms, but have had low uptake even in our highly engaged community. How do we reach community and entice them to want to volunteer their time for our program? So it's great that you've gone after the existing list. I would say that one of the biggest challenges for anyone is time. And you've said that exactly. How do we get them to volunteer their time for our program? And I think there is a place for doing things differently in this space. I'm not saying that it's a paid space. I don't think that's the case, but I do think that there is an opportunity to co-design programs from the bottom up instead of retrofitting programs over the community and wondering why they don't participate. So I know that's really harsh, and I've done it so many times where I've designed something and said, well, no one will come, why not? And it's like, well, they were never going to. It was never going to work. So I've had a bit of time working with a couple of councils who've done this internally and said, we went and we listened to the community, or we listened to the departments first, and then we built out the solution based on the conversation. So that's not probably the solution or the answer you want to hear, but sometimes if you've got that end in mind and you want to have that relationship that's authentic, then it's about going to people like Eva from the beginning and saying, this is what we need to happen. What does that look like? And it might mean that you've got those 10 people before you even start because they've been part of the process, and say, look, we'll do this with you. Will you bring the people along with you? So it could be that. I think also understanding the commitment. People's time is linked with their other stresses at the moment. What we've talked about, financial, housing, trust, all of those things are influencing participation more broadly. And also flexibility. Is there ways of, hey, the commitments can be this or that. It can be online for some, in person for X. There's childcare available. There's flexible timings to attend. All of those factors at the beginning with the co-design will help a little bit. I also am a big believer in trying to shake up the approach a little bit. So if it's just, I don't know what the program was, but if it was just an environmental program, is there a way you can add it to something else so it's a little less, oh, it's just another thing I have to go, what are people getting back from it? Whether it's, something that they enjoy, or, adding something fun to it, or there's a connection time as well. Just not underestimating the people's desire to have those quality community connections as well. Hopefully that helps you there. How do we reach community? No, we've done that one. How to engage younger generations and how do I best connect in with community champions? So the only way I know how to do this is to go to where these young people already are. So either going to schools or going to youth committees if you've got them, or people who are already working with those groups and connecting in and locking your programs into those. So going into schools and doing it. If you think it's hard to get community champions who are adults, getting community champions who are 15 is infinitely harder. Just like it's harder to get a 15-year-old out of the house in the morning, it is just really challenging. And Yeah, so I would go to the schools and the organisations who work with those people. How do you ensure you have an appropriate activity for each member to participate? I would ask what it is that they will be part of, or like to be part of, or good at, or have interest in, or capabilities for. And if that's not something that's part of the offering, maybe it's something that could be part of it. So yeah, I would be asking those questions. And the best ways to engage young people without waste or residents in MUDs. Again, I've seen some really interesting FOGO programs around community champions where that is engaging in buildings with existing networks. So going to them and saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. How are you going to, how can we help you and support you to make it work? It's really hard to engage young people on waste, or anyone on waste, really. So I would try and find other ways to have those conversations, whether it's, you know, an opportunity to give giveaways, you know, opportunity that's in the building where you've got a pop-up that's just a quick, I've done pop-ups in high-rise buildings where we had, you know, free chocolates, do the survey, you know, here's the information, complete it, get a $10 voucher. Like that's the level of, and we stayed there for 4 hours, you know, doing that on various days. So it's not easy work. But if you've got people who are activated in the building who can do the legwork for you and you're prepared to engage, and, you know, if you're at that level, yeah, then that's probably, but yeah, young people are really hard. Like we've got to, and I would be working with your youth team, an engagement team if you have one, or other organizations that understand young people, or young people themselves, because I am not one anymore. And yeah, it's a really tricky space, but they do really care and they are deeply concerned about climate change. So if you can leverage that, there is a sense that, you know, action is required, and that they are prepared to support initiatives that will make a difference. Trust is harder one, though, I would agree. All right, so I'm just going to I've got some more room for more questions, so I'm going to quickly just check in, make sure there's anything else. But I do want to just plug that if you haven't been part of our home program and you're from a council, then please let us know. We'd happily send you some more information around it. It is an engagement program for communities. And we do provide, you know, 9 topic areas where we have regular webinars and opportunities. Eva's been one, and Gay have been wonderful, passionate members of both Winter Caribbean and Port Stephens councils who've been participating. One of our councils said this, you know, it's made it possible to deliver sessions to residents that we wouldn't have been able to provide otherwise. And that's exactly what we do. We're kind of like a multivitamin for your education and engagement programs. It's not going to fix it for you, but it will help the health of your offering to your community. So this is the report. I would like to take any further questions or comments. I don't want to keep you any longer than I know you need to be kept. So, but please, if you've got any further questions, Anna's going to send on those links again. In the email, we'll also send you the recording from today if you want to share it with your colleagues or community. And we also have, yeah, all the links for all the PDFs and things that I've mentioned as well. And we go. Any more, Anna? Any more questions that I can see? I do want to thank Eva again for her wonderful information. Please go and check out the Eco Network Port Stephens and have a look at the work that they've done up there, and maybe subscribe to their email. Yes, please do that. If you do have questions specifically about your community, we are always excited to work with councils around Australia. So please reach out. There's no question that's too silly. There's no program that's too weird. We've worked on some absolute cracking campaigns on all sorts of things. So I'm really happy to hear from you. And I really appreciate your time and your interest and your support. And even though it's hard out there to have these conversations with community, we know that there's no better potential advocates and supporters for the work that we do. And we will only be able to decarbonise and implement these solutions with the support of community champions. So whilst it's not easy, it is worth doing. And we recognise that there are ways to make it easier than others. So yeah, if you've got particular things that you want to share, let us know. But thank you so much for your time today and for your interest. And we look forward to seeing you at something else in the future. Thank you, Eva. Thanks, everyone. It's been my absolute pleasure.